welcome to the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast, where we talk with entrepreneurs, founders, and leaders at B2B services, tech, and SaaS companies to learn the systems and processes they've used to create success for their business. We'll also learn from marketing and sales experts to provide insights to help you grow your business. I'm your host, Mark Osborne, and the podcast is brought to you by Modern Revenue Strategies and their 10x ROI B2B growth guarantee. Schedule a free diagnostic call to learn the fastest path to double your B2B revenues in just 90 days. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Mark Osborne, and today I'm excited to welcome two guests, but from one company. So Triple Diamond Brand Development is the brainchild of Solveig Petch, who goes by Petchy, and she's going to share some of her background and expertise with us today, as well as Rachel Allen. So Petchy is a value-centered, whip-smart brand strategist who spent the past 20 plus years creating remarkable branding for the quietly rebellious for businesses all over the world. And Rachel is a fast-thinking, deeply nerdy marketer, those are her words, not mine, with 15 plus years of broad-ranging experience providing heart-led, data-driven outreach for businesses and nonprofits. So Rachel, Petchy, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much
Thanks
for
for
having
having us.
Yeah, so I'm so interested to get into our conversation. Tell us a little bit about how the two of you sort of came together. From our earlier conversations, I know you kind of played different roles on the team there at Triple Diamond. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, we had sort of swam in the same circles for, gosh, what, 10 years, maybe?
Something
And
like that, yeah.
we'd had a lot of like clients in common. We'd known a bunch of people. And finally, we had the brilliant idea. We're like, hey, we do work that complements each other really well. What if we did that together? And we ended up working together on a couple of projects, and it just flowed incredibly well. And so we were like, hey, we should do this for real. And that's how Triple Diamond came about.
Oh, that's great. So what exactly do you guys do there at Triple Diamond? Because, brand is can be kind of a big nebulous space. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs, operators in the B2B space especially have had the experience of working with someone that kind of does marketing for marketing's sake, or maybe, spends hours and hours obsessing on this color blue versus that color blue. They don't always understand what's the value of a brand or what a brand is. So tell us a little bit about that and how that connects to your work.
Well, I think the really great thing about this collaboration between Rachel and myself is the fact that we have such an overlap in our expertise. So we are both strategists at heart. And so we put a lot of work into that underlying strategic brand foundation. But then we go off and do our separate things, and where I take the strategic insights and turn them into brand identities, like the visuals and what you actually see. Rachel has this knack of I don't know how she does it. It's kind of magic. Words just fall out of her brain. And there's something that just happens when we get together in a room alongside with the client, because they play such an integral part to this as well. And it's every time I'm amazed, because we go into these strategy sessions and it starts off messy, like really messy. And you think, what on earth is going to come from this? And then after we've kind of emptied our brains onto the table, that's when all of the little golden nuggets start to emerge. And we're like, oh, wow, look at that, look at that. And that's the magic. So that's, I think, the strength in combining our areas of expertise. Wouldn't you agree, Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something what we talk about on our website, actually, and it just came so naturally. I was like, well, individually, we're brilliant at what we do, but there's something completely different, like a different dimension that comes together when we work together and when we have that client there as well, which is why it's actually called Triple Diamond as opposed to Double Diamond, because, there's the two of us, but the client is so important to the process. It just doesn't happen without them.
That's really interesting. So let's get a little bit tactical. So what is a brand? So, this is a term that's not always really clearly defined. How do you define it there at Triple Diamond?
Well, I have a way of describing what a brand is. Well, I think we all know what a brand isn't by now. At least if you've been in business for a while, you know that, just having a logo and some colors isn't enough to call it a brand.
Okay.
But when I talk to people about branding, I like to distinguish between a brand and the act of branding, because they're very different things. And a brand is not just what you see on the surface level, it's what people think about you, it's what people feel when they interact with your brand. It's like all of those little touch points, and the combined impression that they make on your audience or the people that come into contact with your brand. And you really can't control that 100%,
Yeah.
which is a bit scary.
Because
But then you
because
have,
everyone that interacts with you has their own takeaway from it. Like, so
yeah,
you
because it's
can't
also
control them. Yeah.
subjective, right? And like what one person could see red and think that means one thing, and it brings up an emotion for them. But the next person, they could get a different emotion from seeing the same color or from reading the same words. So that's why there's no way that you can be in control of your brand at all points. But that's where branding comes in. So the act of branding is it's all of those little things that you do to try and steer people's perception of your brand in the right direction to where you want them. So it's like everything from, yes, your brand identity and your logo and your colors and all of that, but it's also your verbal identity, your tone of voice and your brand personality and how you come across when you communicate. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that reminds me of, some of the things that we see so often is by really defining, a niche of, who you serve and the ideal customer profile and really understanding the types of companies that you're working with, as well as the sort of personas of different people on the, sort of buying committee, whether it's the decision maker or the champion or technical influencers. That's what gives you sort of an understanding of the marketplace and how they're likely to interpret red or how they're likely to interpret a certain turn of phrase. And so you can use the colors and imagery and turns of phrase. It's going to resonate with that specific market in a specific way, but only if you take the time to really know that market, and to really know who those people are rather than just sort of basing it on your own assessment of I like this color or I like this turn of phrase. It's really about that market.
And speaking of like personas and stuff, if I can just like add a little note there, I think also beware not to fall into the trap of just creating a persona, making it up out of thin air, because
Yeah,
like that was a big thing in marketing for a long while. And it just doesn't really work because it's a made up person.
sure.
Instead, like you could have personas, but try to make it up based off of real people, because after all, we're all humans.
Right.
And so you've probably had like someone that you've worked with that you really enjoyed working with, or that you resonated with, or that your values aligned. And then you can use those people to create those personas. So that's just a little extra tip there.
I'm
Yeah.
so glad you added that. That's one of my very favorite soapboxes to get up on the internet and scream about. I actually wrote an ebook way back when called Kill Your Client Avatar because I was so annoyed by people being like, my ideal client is the buyer on the board and they play golf twice a week and whatever. I'm like, that doesn't tell me anything about them. What do they care about? Who do they love? What actually motivates them to make business decisions? Like, that's so much more important than what kind of cereal they have in the morning.
Yeah, that's so true. Well, and also one of the things that we see oftentimes in working with companies is they've defined their, ideal client profile by who they really want to work with, whether that company type exists in the real world or whether that person exists in the real world. They describe what they really want, not who actually exists. And so we do an exercise with companies where to define their ideal, client profile, we look at who represented 80% of your revenues over the last 24 months. That's your tier one ideal client. Like whether you like it or not, that's who represents your ideal client. Now, how do we describe that company in a way that's tangible and targetable and segmentable, so that we can actually go out and then have some messaging to them? And then we always really emphasize the persona of the buyer, again, to not just be who you want it to be, but who it actually is. And one of the ways that we get at that is we do interviews with sort of the folks that have been the buyers or the champions, the decision makers that they've worked with over the last couple of years, to get that real voice of the customer. What are some other ways that the two of you work to sort of bring in that real world representation of the customer?
I mean, we do interviews as well.
Yeah.
We do survey work and pull keywords out of that.
Okay.
We ask the client, we do exercises with them, and we ask them, like, who have you enjoyed working with? I know, Petchy, you were pulling this out, like, who have your ideal clients been? Who's been your ideal business relationship? And then I know on my like super nerdy side of things, I think a lot about like the neuroscience of motivation and what motivates people just in general as humans, because I think it's so easy to get really wrapped up in your head and be like, but how could I possibly know what this decision maker is going to decide? And it's like, well, how do you decide things?
Right.
We're all people, we all are motivated by largely the same things.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective, and bringing that sort of psychology into it, I can see how that adds a lot of value. So, speaking of value and sort of the value of a brand, a lot of businesses, they're so busy with just kind of running, and they've got an idea, and they're trying to build and deliver that idea, and maybe they don't take the time to really think through their brand strategy from the start. So first off, what are the kind of steps that go into really having a brand strategy, instead of just, well, pay somebody on Fiverr to, make a logo and decide my colors for me, and then pay somebody else to take that and put it on a website. What are the real steps to having a brand strategy? And then what's the value of that when brands take the time, or companies take the time, to build that brand as an asset up front, rather than just kind of throwing something up there as a placeholder, and then I'll get to that later after I've got some customers. Talk to us a little bit about the process and the value of taking the time to do that process.
Well, I'd say that the first step for any business definitely is just to acknowledge that you are going to have to do some work. You're going to have to do some really hard inner work. Like, you're going to have to think, and it's going to be deep, and it's going to be gory and messy. And you're not just going to be able to load it all over to a designer that you found on Fiverr, because it's your brand and you need to take ownership of it. So I think that's the first and most important step, is that you have to be ready and you have to be willing and prepared to actually put in some work.
Yeah. I was actually just going to kick it over to you and say, talk about the steps, Petchy. I was going to talk about the cost, but I know that when we have people come in, it is a very, like, it's a messy process to begin with. That's why our process is actually 3 months long. I know a lot of people are like, brand in a day, brand in a week, and that just doesn't work. Humans don't process that fast. We don't
Yeah.
think that fast. So
Mm.
we start out with a month of just getting everything out on the table, everything from my brain, your brain, client's brain, everything. And like you said, it's kind of messy the first couple of times. It's like, I don't know, maybe it's not going to happen this time, but it always does. And
It
then once
always
we
does.
have all of that out, then Petchy and I go away and apply our expertise to it, and we really sit down and create that strategy and think about how we make all this mean something.
Mm. So we are kind of strict with our clients, aren't we? We kind of force them to think about the questions that they don't really want to dig too deep into, because it's uncomfortable. So we ask them all these things about values, and we challenge them, because like when most of my clients come to me and we get to the sort of, oh, well, let's talk about your brand values, they all want to pick these safe and generic values, and they all,
Sure.
oh, we're innovative, or we're sustainable, or we're professional. And I'm like, well, yeah, you and every other business in this
Yes.
world. So we challenge our clients throughout the process as well, like to pick brand values that really actually matter and that will make an impact. We challenge them to think about where they want to go and where they are now. And then we look at, like, what's the gap between where they are now and where they want to be? And how can we use brand strategy to bridge that gap. Because that's really what brand strategy is. It's like figuring out where you are, where you want to be, and how we're going to get from A to B.
Interesting. So you just sort of described that it's a lot of hard work, that you really kind of push your clients on finding things that are authentic and real and meaningful and valuable to the marketplace. So what's the value of putting in that work? So, to play the devil's advocate of that founder who's like, I don't have the time to do that work, or I just don't have the emotional fortitude to do that work. I'm just going to skip it. What's the cost of not doing it, and what's the value of doing it?
I mean, I think in terms of cost, and this may sound dramatic, but I really do believe it's true. You risk losing your business. If you don't have a strong brand that's going to attract people to you, your business is most likely not going to succeed. We know from the statistics, the majority of them do fail within the first 5 years.
Yeah,
And so I mean, I think that's the primary risk. You risk the business. If you manage to sort of limp along and survive, then you have already set yourself up for exponentially increasing expenses as you go because your brand isn't strong enough to actually attract people to you. So you have to go out and chase them all the time. And that's exhausting and that's expensive. And that's where we see businesses that have a lot of churn. So you'll have maybe you put out 100 proposals a quarter, fantastic. But if you're landing 3 people, not great.
right.
So it's a good way to end up doing a lot of work for not a lot of return. And it gets progressively more expensive the longer you put it off. So let's say that you've just gotten, let's say, Series B funding. Fantastic. That's great. And you're like, well, we could probably just outsource this whole branding thing. It doesn't really matter. Except when that next round of funding comes along, it's like, oh man, now we need like a really strong brand. And now we're so much further down into this. So there's so much more cleanup to do. We've like gotten these ideas in our head about what we think our customers want, but we're not really sure. So now we got to clean that up. So it just ends up being this big tangled mess that gets progressively worse the longer you put it off. So there's a lot of financial costs, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of emotional costs because then you're like, oh man, my business should be so much more successful than this. Why doesn't anyone like it? So I understand I guess the learning curve, the hesitancy to be like, I don't want to sit down and think about what I really care about because that's slow and tiring and means I have to think about myself. But it
And
just
I
gets
just want to make
worse.
money.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And like, what's the whole ship fast, fail fast, right?
Right.
Sure. Whatever. But we're not all launching an app. If you're doing a business that involves working with other humans, which spoiler alert, we all are, even if you are building an app, you can't really ship fast and fail fast with a brand. You need to get that solid foundation in, which is why what we do, we call it building legacy brands. When we work with people, we build brands that last the duration of the business. It's not something where you just get like a goofy little first brand out there and it kind of looks terrible, but people love you anyway for some reason. And then you get better and better. It's like, nope, let's get it right the first time. Let's save you a ton of money and so much heartache over the long run.
That's really interesting. And you make a really great point there, and something that I think is often overlooked. And, a lot of times people are like, well, I'm not in B2C. I don't have to worry about my brand. Because that's something that B2C folks do. And B2B, people are only making decisions based on logic. It's only, the sort of the hard facts of the deal. My brand doesn't really matter. But something that we see so frequently is that that's just not true, because in the B2B space, there's another person in that business who's making that business decision, and people are emotional animals. And so they make decisions based on emotion, and having a strong brand can really sort of cut through and make that connection. Do you see that to be true?
Absolutely. I think something that I say to clients a lot is that you don't need to be loud, you just need to be heard. Because
Huh.
we've been taught that the way that you get business is by being the loudest, by putting out the most proposals, by having the biggest LinkedIn network or whatever. But the way that things are, our business world is just so complex now that all that does is put you in an arms race with whoever has more money than you. And there's always going to be somebody who's bigger, somebody who has more money, somebody who's actually taken the time to do their brand.
Yeah.
So instead, like that's a losing proposition. Instead, you need to focus on being heard by the people you actually want to work with. And that's what a brand does. It gives them that feeling of like, oh, those are my people. I can trust them. I know what they're doing. It does a lot of the preemptive work of rapport building so that when you do actually put out that proposal or you get on the call or whatever with the people, you're not fighting this uphill battle of, I have to prove to you that I actually care and I know what I'm doing, and you have to like me, and then we have all the logical reasons you want to hire me. The brand's already taken care of the first half of that. And then you can really get into the like, okay, we already know we're cool here. Here's why I'm the best option.
That's really interesting. Well, in that perspective that, essentially brand makes everything else much more efficient, you really start to see that financial impact of it because instead of having to outspend your competitors, you're just outperforming them with even a lower level of spend in advertising. Or, instead of having to make 100 different proposals to just close 3 of them, you can make 10 proposals and close all 10 of them because you're magnetically attracting the right folks to you who resonate with your approach. And then your brand sort of helps you bring that through all the way.
And then doing that hard work that you really didn't want to do in the beginning, it's actually going to pay off because I think it's something like 83% of people want to buy from brands that they feel their values aligned.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you stand for, if you don't know like who you are, like how are you going to communicate that to people?
Right. That's right. Yeah. If you don't know if you don't know, they definitely don't know. And so
And they're going to make up a story about it, and you probably won't like it.
that's right. Well, and the other thing that happens too is, finding good talent is so hard and so tough today. But if you know what you stand for, that becomes one of the things that, sort of attracts other like-minded people. And so then having good talent makes you even more competitive in the marketplace. And so one of those really key aspects of a strong brand strategy that's oftentimes overlooked.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I think the world of work has become so volatile. I know we've been saying that for like 10 years, but it feels like it's just getting more and more chaotic.
For sure.
And people don't have the same structures to rely on that they previously did in their concept of a career. They're going with what they value. They're going with what they feel like gives their life meaning. And to go back to what Petchy said, if you don't know what that is, then you can have all the, beautiful rec rooms and the Friday beers or whatever that you want, but you just won't be able to retain that top talent because there's no heart to it.
And also if you just make it up because it
Yeah.
sounds good,
Right?
people are going to see through that because you're not going to follow up on your like what you say you're going to do. You say you stand for this, you
Yeah.
say you care about this, but your actions say something else. So once you've actually determined all of like the strategic foundations, going out there and marketing is going to be a lot easier because you don't have to pretend and you don't have to think of like new things to say all the time. It's like because it's there. You already have it. You have the kind of a user guide for your business and your brand and a guidebook because you're going to end up in situations as well where well that are less than favorable and someone's probably going to say something not very nice about you or they're not going to like you because you've messed up and like how are you going to deal with that? That's also something that we try to talk to our clients about. It's like when you have all of these strategic decisions and you've already made them, you know how to handle a crisis,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and you don't have to worry about the complexity of it. You don't have to worry about, whatever situation you run into, you have that foundational answer to it because you've already thought about it.
yeah, that's so true. Well, and that one of the things that, you know, when marketing really does their job, they earn their seat at the, sort of the executive table because not only are they sort of the voice of the customer back to the leadership team, but they have this, this guiding light, this North Star, this brand strategy that everyone has agreed to of this is what we stand for. This is why we do what we do, and this is how we do it, and this is who we serve and the way that we serve them. So it really can guide, product decisions as well as, marketing decisions, how you respond to crises and all of those things.
Yeah.
And this is something I see a lot of companies do wrong, actually, where they have their like the management is separate from the brand team or the marketing team, although they don't talk together. But in reality, all of these should overlap. So you've got your
Right.
business strategy, you know what you want to do in business, and that should inform your brand strategy. And then in turn, your brand strategy informs your marketing strategy. So it's
Yeah.
all like it's a linear process. So skipping the brand strategy part is it's going to make marketing's job a lot harder.
And
That's right.
it also massively backfires if you do have that first thing in the linear where it's just the C-suite is like, I don't know, make the brand look cool or make the brand appeal to Gen Z or whatever.
Sure.
You can do that, and then it's going to absolutely backfire on you because your feedback loop's disrupted. You don't have that stuff coming back from marketing. Marketing's going to be harder, and it's just this chaotic mess.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that we see oftentimes too, is that companies really struggle if they haven't taken the time to build this brand strategy. They're out there, trying to create awareness, but it's awareness that isn't creating demand because they don't know how they're different or what the value is for them. And so then they have to work double hard. They got to create awareness and demand. However, if you've taken the time to build this brand strategy, everything you say differentiates you from other people and magnetically attracts the people that you're for, so that you're creating demand as you're creating awareness, which makes all of your marketing that much more efficient and effective. Awesome. Well, this is a great conversation. Obviously, we could talk about this all day, but I've got to be mindful of your time. So what's something that's on the horizon for Triple Diamond that you're really excited about?
So we haven't announced this yet. If we need to come out, we can. But we are doing some Triple Diamond mixers. We've created a Triple Diamond cocktail, and we were thinking about, ways that we could interact with our audience. And I was trying to think about something I would actually want to show up to, because like webinar, absolutely not. Networking event, cocktail party, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So we'll be doing some Triple Diamond mixers, and it's just invite only people who want to come together and talk about branding while having a delightful cocktail that we've created. And Petchy, do you want to talk through some of our other things?
Yeah, and there's also a private podcast on the horizon, which we're really excited about. Can't wait to record those. I think we said we were going to actually do it next week, Rachel, aren't we?
I think so, yeah.
Well, very exciting. We'll definitely need to learn more about these cocktails you have on the horizon. As an aspiring mixologist myself, I can't wait to learn more about that. But thank you both so much for joining us today. I'm sure our audience learned a lot about brand strategy and the value of that for a business, even in B2B environments. For the folks that have been listening and like, what they're saying makes a lot of sense to me. How can they get in touch with you?
We're real easy to find. So if you look up Triple Diamond on LinkedIn, you can email us at hello@tripleddiamond.vip. You can also look at our website, which is just tripleddiamond.vip. Yeah, I think that's it. Are we anywhere else?
I think that sums it up nicely.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I look forward to continuing the dialogue and hearing more about these upcoming cocktail hours and podcasts.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to send an invite your way.
Thank you for joining this episode of the B2B Growth Blueprint podcast. We hope you've gained insights to grow your business. If you enjoyed this discussion, please rate, comment, like on your favorite platform, and share to others who will find it useful. Do you know a CEO, founder, or leader at an early stage B2B services, tech, or SaaS company who would like to be a guest and share their story? Send us a note. Let's schedule a conversation.